Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today I am joined by Dr. Darla Bishop. She is the founder of Finances LLC and the author of How to Afford Everything. Thank you, Darla, so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so stoked to talk to you. You don't even know.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
I love talking about, because I love the title of your book, How to Afford Everything, because I think for so many people out there, we are just trying to figure out, like, all of us, we want different things. We're thinking about like how we spend our money, what's coming in, what's going out. And I think that just the idea of how to afford everything is such a cool concept. It's very different than the common mentality of you can't afford everything. So tell me a little bit about your journey to become a financial expert and author. And I'd love to, get into it and to talk about how we can afford everything.
Yeah, so I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. A big city. Once again, when I was growing up, it was kind of in a decline, but now it's coming back to its full glory, and I love that for the city. And growing up, I recognized pretty early, like as a young teenager, that some of the problems we were experiencing, we didn't have to experience them. It's just we were broke, right? We didn't have enough money to sort of throw at problems, which were not even big problems, but led to big problems because we couldn't solve them early or prevent them.
Yep.
And so when I had the opportunity to go to college, I remember being at the University of Michigan and one of my classmates had a Range Rover. And I was like, okay, I am as smart, potentially, arguably smarter than that person because of all the things I had to go through in order to make it to this university. And he just got here in his fully loaded Range Rover at 17. And so if I can figure out the money part, then I've got it going. And because I had the gift of a full funded scholarship, I did not have to work, although I had fully intended and expected that I would be a working college student. That first year, I didn't work. I just joined clubs and participated and was like very active on campus and spent a lot of time in the library reading about money. Because if I could figure out money, I knew that my life would be so different.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a, it's true. And I think a lot of us, are aware of our situation financially, sometimes earlier than others, but like you said, when you got to campus and you realized that there wasn't much, you were in the same place with the same people. But I like that you actually took that not as a us versus them. Look at this, guy over here, probably thinks instead it was just getting curious, like, okay, what if I did figure this part out? What if I did understand money? What if it didn't have to be like you mentioned before? And I think we both grew up with some difficulties financially where we're like, man, you can't solve every problem with money, but it solves a lot of them really, really well. Like when the washing machine breaks and then there's a water issue, or then you have to, like, everything becomes more expensive when you don't have money to solve problems when they're small. And so I think that's something that, we both saw, and it was like, these are not huge problems.
Not at first, at least.
They get
But
bigger,
they get bigger,
and they
and they get
compound, or
harder.
something else happens, and then it kind of feels like you're always trying to claw your way out. And I feel like that is one of the most unfortunate things, when you talk to people who have dental work that they've put off. All of these different things that are happening because it's been difficult for people who don't have money saved to kind of stay ahead of these issues. So I think, I think that is something that it can either click where you say, yeah, I kind of want to change things, or I want to figure it out, or you just say, nope, that's not me. This is me. And then you get comfortable with where you're at, even if you don't like it. So
Yeah.
I love that you kind of explained how you came to that realization. So when you were studying, when you were learning in school, did you decide you wanted to study finance, or did you go a different direction?
No, professionally, I do something completely different, but it's connected still. So professionally, I work as a public health professional. I currently am working with a health insurance company but also am a professor of health policy. The
Hmm.
cool thing about having a doctorate is it lets you do a few things all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so what I found when I was in graduate school is that all those things I saw and felt and thought about money, like, man, I think we would be healthier if we had more money, were true. That there are real, studied, documented connections between someone's financial situation, their financial literacy, their health, and their longevity.
Hmm. Yeah. No, and when you think about it, it does make sense, right? When you have money for preventative care or um exercise, healthy foods, all of these things that I think, you can do this on a smaller budget, but I think for a lot of people it is very expensive. Or at least even some of the food that's less expensive is less good, less healthy. So I think there is such a common thread. And then with mental health, I mean, you could see just how much stress and anxiety, you know, being in those stressful financial situations all the time, which is what it is when you don't have anything saved or anything kind of, to kind of buffer those, unfortunate incidents that happen that require money. So definitely makes sense there. So with your worries, so you decided to study, to go into public health. And so tell me a little bit more about how you came around to wanting to share some of your financial knowledge then.
So as I was reading books and, all of my classmates kind of noticed, like, how come you always have money?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I work a lot because I had done the math. From reading the books, I figured out I needed to live below my means, right? I know what that means now, but back then I was like, well, that means that I need more means. So I
Hmm.
just went and got extra jobs once I felt like my classes were mostly under control. So in college, I probably had 2 to 4 jobs at a time, depending on the semester.
Hmm.
And they'd be like, well, when we want to do something, you're working, but you have the money to do it. So which is more important? And I used to have the saying that people sometimes, I was just at a wedding this weekend with some friends from college, and they were like, oh, so are you still, you'd rather be tired than broke? Yep. I'd much rather be tired than broke. Still, all these years later. And what I figured out after reading probably maybe 60, 70 books is they all had the same core principles, right? Live below your means, save for the future, be careful with debt. Now, where they fell on whether debt was good, bad, or in between kind of followed a spectrum, but those were the three core messages. But what they were missing is for someone who had to completely learn from what I thought was scratch, it didn't necessarily tell me where to start and where to go next and what that decision tree might look
Hmm.
like because I was doing something that was going to be completely different than I saw the adults growing up doing. Because of my education, because of my network, I was going to have a completely different relationship, not only with work, but also with the money I earned doing that work. So I couldn't follow their path. So I needed a new decision tree. The other piece that was missing is I got so tired of reading books that told me the reason I had a bad financial situation or credit score or debt was because of bad decisions I made. And I was like, no, 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 no. Mm-mm-mm.
Mm.
Let me stop you right there. Because if you actually saw the menu of options available to me, you would not believe how the heck I even got here. So
Yeah.
instead of telling me in this wagging tone that I made bad decisions, to be like, hey, I don't know what decisions you made, but I'm sure at the time they were the best that you thought you had available to you, or based on what you knew, you did the best you could because we all do. And so here's how we go forward. And so I wanted to write the book that I needed instead of having to read 70 books to feel
Hmm.
like really comfortable about what money is and what my relationship to money was and how I could be to where I wanted to be. I was like, maybe if I write a book, I'll save people some years and some tears.
Yes. No, I think that it's so true. I think a lot of traditional financial advice, and like you mentioned, and I've read that it's basically the same thing. When I started reading every book that had rich in the title. Like I just was like, okay, and like Think and Grow Rich, everything that had it because I was trying to figure it out. And I think, like you said, like you can't exactly just go ask somebody. Like you gotta, you might not have those people to ask, but there is kind of a sense of like, well, the good and the bad, the decisions. Like I think that a lot of people who maybe wrote those books never really had any experience not having wealth or money, which is fine. And but I do think that it is kind of that shame and judgment piece of it isn't really helpful. Even deciding what's good or bad debt, it just is what it is. A lot of people feel really lousy about having any mortgage, even if it's at 2.9%. While there's some people who don't feel that bad at all if they go into debt because they feel like, that decision might have really meant something to them. It's fine either way. It just, the numbers are what they are. So figuring out
Mhm.
how to manage your money doesn't necessarily have to be like, well, a good person wouldn't, it has nothing to do with that. I know plenty
Nothing.
of fantastic people that have, had to make some, you know, wild financial decisions in order to pull
And
things off.
and if you do it with some sense of reality and like hope that those things can work out, especially if you got some time on your side. The thing that I frequently say is like, don't should on yourself through this
Yeah.
process, right? Like, really approach as we're getting figuring out where your money is and isn't. Let's not be judging ourselves. Let's not, I should have, I
Mhm.
should not have. Just be super curious about it. Be like a private investigator about what has been happening in your money in the last 90 days, what decisions you made, what led you to make those decisions, and if there's opportunity for you to make different decisions. They might not even be better, they just might be different.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think sometimes even just looking back, even if it is just a couple months, and I do this with my financial planning clients as well, where we're just looking, I don't care. They might say, oh my God, I can't believe I spent this money on that. I can't believe I got this many takeout orders or whatever. I don't care. I just want to see what we're looking at here. And so that piece of it, really, it's very natural for us to judge ourselves critically, even though at the time we thought we were the ones that spent the money. So I think that's really good to just kind of take that should part out of it, because it's like, yes, I should eat a salad every time. I'm not going to. Yes, I should, but we make decisions the way we do it. But taking that away and just kind of evaluating, like, why did I do that, and getting really curious, like you said, is super important, because a lot of times, especially if you put some time or space between that decision and that impulse, you might make a different choice, like you said. So I want to talk about, affording everything, because I have been guilty of being influenced just like everybody else when it comes to seeing something pop up and then being like, oh, I want that. And then there's other things that I like genuinely want, like a new couch. Every time I sit on it, I think it's time, and like nobody else knows about it. Nobody else in the world cares or would see it, but it's just one of those things. So when you're evaluating your decisions, how do you how do you start? Because we are bombarded with tempting things that want to take our money away from us all day long, every day. So how do you help people who are like, oh, like I just, I can't stop shopping, or I can't stop putting things in my cart?
Ooh, there's a few things. So, you actually had a guest on recently, Kristen, who talked
Mhm.
about values when it comes to your career.
Yeah.
So some of it too is getting down to what really matters the most right now, right? And so for me, I'm in a stage of life where I'm parenting young children. My husband and I have very busy, robust, exciting careers. And so we are working to be incredibly intentional about how we spend our time together as a family, since we're also really interested in spending time at work in my book activities,
Mhm.
and also making sure the kids are active. And so, what's most important in this stage of my life is very different than what it was even 4 or 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And so, all of our additional money, or a bigger share of our money, goes to things that give us our time back so that we can just sit and be with the kids instead of running someplace, that make it easy for us to live and be comfortable in our home. And so that means we actually don't have a lot of extra stuff,
Mhm.
because the extra stuff actually takes me longer to clean, to reorganize, because when the space is a mess, my brain is also a mess,
Mhm.
right? And so one of the first things is I take people through this activity of like, well, what's really important? If you weren't worried about anything, if you had all of the things you need, like paint a picture for me of what your day looks like, of what your week looks like, how your month flows, what
Mhm.
things you're doing, who you're spending your time with, where you're going, where you're not going, because that gives us clues about what truly matters. Because the book is really about how to afford everything that matters.
Mhm.
And it's okay when it changes, as long as you recognize that it's changing, you adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that's important to know that it does change. And I think, buying, like you mentioned, buying back your time. Like you said, when you were in college, you might have been fine working. I was fine working late, when I was single, I didn't have children, I didn't mind working. Like I liked working. And so a lot of times I would be happy, and I think like now I want more of my free time back. Like you said, I have children, young children, my family, like I really do when I'm there, I want to fully be there. I don't want to have my mind or, focused on all these other things. So, like you said, having having the ability to use your money is very different. Like I would have never paid for someone to clean my apartment ever when I was because that just wouldn't have been the priority. So, it can shift and it can certainly change and I think that it's important to realize that and like allow yourself to like not you know we all change with what we care about and so but I think sometimes we do get into routines and habits and we don't realize okay I am spending a lot on this but I don't really want to be and you're not
Hmm.
going to know it without awareness. So I think that's great that you kind of walk people through that part because a lot of times people will tell me I value traveling, I value being with my family, and you look at their calendar and their accounts and it doesn't match up. And that
Right.
might be why a lot of people overspend is because they don't feel good and they're trying to fix it. So doing that work, I think ahead of time can be super successful. So what are some other things that you've changed or what you've thought about being a parent? Because you've said that that's kind of where you're at right now. But I think that's become um, even just getting through the summer in the 80s when I was growing up, my parents weren't exactly concerned about having me at an exciting camp every single week. I don't think I went to one, but now it's kind of summer vacation. Everything feels like huge expenses are changing for parents. So what are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a huge summer camp build this summer. Thank goodness we are at the point where school is starting, so that will help with other things. For what I realize is with kids, with adults, we can kind of wait on things, right? Like you said, you want to get a new couch or to upgrade something in the home. If
Yep.
you don't do that right now, no one's going to be hurt, right?
Nope.
But if my kids need new soccer cleats
Yeah.
because their feet have grown, that's a safety issue. That's a
Hmm.
body formation issue, right? Like that's a developmental issue. If I can't get them in the right shoe size, then it might change how their feet feel. It might change how they're able to be in the sport. It
Yep.
might change how their body even develops, how long they're
Hmm.
wearing shoes that don't fit correctly. And so what I realized about having kids is I can put a lot of my stuff off because I'm a grown up, but for the kids, I got to have
Hmm.
some money, some resources, something set aside so that when the need happens, I can fulfill the need because the kid can't wait the same way that I can.
Hmm. Yeah, no,
And
that's definitely true.
and that's a big adjustment, right? If
Yeah.
that's a big adjustment if you haven't been in the position or in the habit of putting things aside for later or even for soon, that all of a sudden all the kids at the same time need all new sports equipment.
Hmm.
That can be a big bill if you
Yeah.
aren't prepared for that.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's definitely something that I've noticed as my kids are, 10 and 12, they're starting to like need new everything kind of at the same time. And even, getting, we had to register for the bus, which was, $700 for the two kids. And it's like, well, you've got to do it. Like this has to happen today. So I think those things, they feel unexpected or urgent, but like you said, having some money saved because it's not that it's not going to happen or it might not happen. These things will happen. It's just the timing might be different. So definitely a very important thing for parents to kind of save for and to adjust.
Right. And it might mean that if you're used to putting a few $100s away into that pot or that
Mhm.
savings account or that bucket, you might want to double it for a little while just because these things are going to come up
Yeah.
and it'll be really hard for all types of reasons to say no to them.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think as you plan ahead, I think there's a lot of times, especially with the kids' activities or certain things where you can save money signing up early. You can find ways to, if you have time, instead of I have to get these cleats today, you can save money or shop. It's really just a matter of, you know, when you have the money available and when you can do it. Because if you can act quickly, usually that does help save people money.
It does. And if your network matters here too, right?
Hmm.
So I always try to keep at least a couple of parenting friends who have kids like a stage or two ahead of ours. Because let me tell you, I am always so happy to give away our very gently used stuff
Hmm.
to whoever wants it because I don't want it in the house anyway. It doesn't
Yeah.
fit. I can't really sell it. It's hard to sell that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
So who has a kid that's just behind mine that I can give this stuff away? So find yourself some friends a stage or two ahead of you because
Hmm.
one, even if they can't give you the item because maybe their kids have ruined it anyway, they can tell you where they got it on sale. They can
Hmm.
remind you like, "Hey, next year you're going to need this, so start looking for it now," because they're walking the path
Hmm.
that you're going to walk.
Yeah, no, very smart. And I do remember like a friend of the family giving us like a whole bag full of clothes because they had a boy and a girl a little bit older. And it was great. I mean, the baby clothes were all fun to get and everyone bought them. But then when you get into like, a little bit older, I think, having some things, and there's always going to be stuff when you go through the closet that has a tag on it still, or that was barely ever, or a shoe size that was completely jumped over. And I think, yeah, giving those away or kind of figuring out who could use them, who could need them, it will save you space because the clutter, and we've talked about this before on different podcasts, it is really, really financially not, and having, to stuff your whole house and clutter everywhere is not a good financial decision. Also, like it takes up space in our brains.
It
And
does.
I know since, we've talked, about school and that, like, I feel like any investment you can make in your brain is a good one. So I'd love to hear from you because one thing that you did financially well that I'd love to hear a little bit more about is how you avoided taking on debt when you were getting your advanced degrees. Now, there might be some people out there that are thinking, I would love to go back to school. I would love to go study something different. Um, a lot of us don't go right directly into the career that we love and we might come upon it later. So how were you able to do that without bringing on so much additional debt?
Yeah, so I was in graduate school for 8 years. Eight. Yes, I was in 8 years. My mom keeps telling me to stop telling people how long I was in grad school because it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, you know what? It does matter. Because one, I want people to know that I earned that degree.
Yes.
I really earned it. But also, too, that if that has to be your story, if it's going to take you some time,
Mhm.
no problem. You can still make it. When you graduate and they say Dr. So and so walked across the stage or Master of so and so crossed across the stage, like they still call you that,
Yeah.
whether it took you 1 year or 11, whatever your
Hmm.
school allows. Um, but yeah, so I was in graduate school and there were some things I did even before I went back to graduate school that helped me make it a no new debt situation. One, when I was looking for graduate programs, I only applied to programs that allowed me to also work while being a graduate student. Now, some people, when they go back for a master's degree or even a doctorate degree, they are wanting to be, they're needing to be a full time student.
Hmm.
That wasn't my story.
Yeah.
I am the oldest of three kids. My mom at that time was not in a financially good place. And so I knew that I needed to still be earning an income in case my younger siblings needed something.
Hmm.
And so I only applied to programs that would accommodate my full time work schedule by having the majority of the classes in evening hours.
Hmm.
And that was one of the ways that made it much easier to be a graduate student who took on no new debt because that
Hmm.
means my job was still paying for my rent, my living
Hmm.
expenses, and I just had to figure the tuition out.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of times we think about the big things that we want. Now that is, and a lot of times education or getting that advanced degrees, that is like that is a lifelong, like that is a goal that is not just, okay, I checked like those are some of those things that are true investments. So I think figuring out ways to do it, like you knew you had to still work. So you found the programs that fit you. I feel like now there's more options in the evening. There's more options for working parents. There's online options, all of these things that exist now that I think unless if you try to get creative about how to do it, there are ways to do it instead of thinking like, well, I think I'm going to have to just go back full time. And like, I've seen people who have gotten out of debt or paid off all their debt and they've felt like very used to being a person in debt. And they've just been like, well, maybe I'll just go get a master's. And I'm like, why? Do you want that? And they're just like, well, I don't know. Maybe it'll help me get a better job. Or other people who just know this is what they want to do. So I think it's different, but it is kind of figuring out like what is that priority for you? And if you had to do it without taking debt, what would someone do? And then getting
Hmm.
really curious because I think there are ways to do it. And sometimes we just think like, no, that's impossible. And then we don't pursue our dreams, because I've found
No.
that sometimes people don't dream big enough, or they've stopped indulging in those ideas of, well, what if I was to go back to school
Hmm.
to do something different? What would it look like?
Yeah. And I know that I, on purpose, also, while there were fully online options, I knew that if I went to a program that had hybrid, where it was a real physical school, that might also later allow me to work at the university, because sometimes one of the ways that one of my classmates also kept um, their debt very, very low as we were in graduate school is they took a job at the university. And when you work at the university, maybe your salary isn't that great, but you have great benefits. Your schedule tends to be a little bit more flexible. And she got a 96% discount on her tuition bill. So she only had to come up with 4% of that tuition bill, which
Mm-hmm.
she frequently could do with very small scholarships.
Yeah, no, I think that it's sometimes it's not. I feel like some people believe it's just the only way. I'm going to have to go 6 figures in debt. I'm going to have to be in debt for the rest of my life. So I love that you're kind of showing how there are, it just might not be the, the standard option. It might be a little bit different, but I think that's so important, because you mentioned a few times about being able to be in school and be able to actually think and build your network and be free from that feeling of, um, how am I going to afford all of this? So I
Hmm.
think that's definitely, it's such a smart way to do it. And I do think a lot of kids, and I saw something about the unused scholarships the other day, how many go unused and stuff. And I think that it's just really applying a little bit of that creativity and effort can go so far, especially with something as expensive as education. So when
And
you
frankly,
mentioned
oh,
your work now, um, I'd love to hear more about, you know, not just, saving and budgeting, but kind of how you invest your money now that you're at the point. Like, what are some of the thoughts that you have for somebody who's like, yeah, I think I've got a handle of this, but I really want to invest in, I don't have a clue where to start.
so if you are an employed person, someone who works for a company or a firm, and you have a retirement account, I always tell people to start there. Maximize anything and everything you can through those tax advantage accounts, because one, it comes out of your paycheck. So it doesn't even land in that bank account for you to think you can spend or move to other places. So before looking to other places to invest, take advantage of any of the not only retirement accounts but investment options that your company may have available to you, but also look closely at your benefits, because many of the benefits, especially if you're working for a large multi-city or even a national company, you may have benefits that can really reduce the cost of some of the things that cost you money in your bigger
Mhm.
life. Like, I know that I use some childcare support
Mhm.
for my kids, and that gives us about 4 or 5 grand every year that no longer comes directly from my budget. And so really taking advantage, if you're an employed program person, of the benefits that are tied to your employment. It's part of your paycheck. So if you don't use it, you're giving yourself a pay cut. And does that sound like something we'd like to do?
Nope.
No. And then once you've confirmed that you're
Mhm.
using anything and everything you can that's based at work, it can be as simple, and in fact, it should be as simple as opening a brokerage account with your favorite, big name brokerage house, the Fidelities of the world, the Voyas of the world, and picking an ETF or an index fund and just putting money in there on a regular basis. The cool thing about investing now is that it is really simple, that you don't have to be incredibly smart. In fact, don't think you're smart, because that's how you'll mess up. Then you're just gambling. Like, find your favorite index fund that's super cheap to own and put some amount of money in that every paycheck, every month, and just set it and forget it.
Mhm.
And every few years, look at it and say, oh, that's growing pretty good.
Yeah.
I like
No,
that.
I think that that's so important, because it has become a lot easier to be an investor, or all of the benefits at work I think are so important. A lot of people just kind of auto enroll into whatever it was that they chose when they first started working. And if you work somewhere for 5-10 years, like we mentioned before about your values and goals, you're a different person now. There might be certain things that you didn't even pay attention to, or that your company has added since, and they are super valuable. As somebody who's self-employed, I will tell you, when I look at a nice benefit package that somebody has, I feel I miss it, because the healthcare benefits, but also some of the things like the legal, the childcare, the education reimbursement, all of these things that might be available to you, they're not going to necessarily like tap you on the shoulder at your desk and be like, hey, this might be a cool idea for you. But like,
Hmm.
there are people who can help you. And a lot of times they will walk you through what's the best options for you or what's changed. But that is such an enormous benefit. And then, yeah, like just starting to invest. I feel like I've heard a lot of people say, well, I need to do more research. I need to understand it. And I do feel like getting started, if it's not through, your employer or what you have available in your 401k, it really is as simple as picking, an index fund. And just the real question isn't which fancy investments should I choose? And I say this as somebody who manages portfolios. It is how can I find more money to direct there
That's right.
is the better question for
Is the
most
better
people to be
question. And
asking.
as soon as possible, because then
Hmm.
you get the time value of money on your side.
Yeah. I don't know anybody that's like, I started too early. Never happens. Not like not it's never happened once. And that comes for saving for a particular big goal or investing. It's just not it just never works out that way. So I think it's so important to kind of keep things, not to overcomplicate things. You mentioned keeping your house kind of clear from clutter, but like I think that could be something to be said about our financial life and our decision making
Hmm.
as well. As a lot of times we have all these conflicting ideas and it keeps us from doing much of anything. So,
Yeah, and I don't talk much about it right now because
mhm,
the audience that I have, I don't want them to get the wrong idea. But when I was really in the thick of this, when I was graduating college and just really trying to get it all together, I knew that even though I knew how to budget, it needed to be the simplest thing ever. And so what I did is I figured out how much money I could pay back on my credit card every month.
mhm,
And at that time, I think it was $1,300. So anything that wasn't rent, and I think I wasn't allowed to pay my car payment on my credit
mhm,
card, I could spend $1,300 on my credit card, and that was it because that's what I knew I could pay back every month. And that was the way I budgeted
mhm,
because trying to figure out the 50/20/20
yep,
and the 85/10/5, that was too complicated for somebody with a bunch of jobs
mhm,
and just trying to get to a different place financially. So I was
mhm.
like, look, once I get to $1,000, put that card in your pocket and don't go over 13 because that's what you know when that bill comes you can pay off every month. And that worked for me for years, is
Mhm.
setting that maximum, swiping the card, getting a few points, and that was just the simplest way for me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of times people are nervous about that because they don't realize they're the ones that can set the maximum. And
Hmm.
they can. It's not, and this happened even when I was getting my first home. I was approved for a lot more, but I knew I could afford this range, and that's where I looked. Now, I see this on TV with say yes to the dress. They say this is what I could spend on a dress, and they're like, but then there's this, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, and then we go up. So I think it's really important. Like you knew exactly what you could pay back, so you kind of stayed there. Didn't
Hmm.
mean you couldn't do anything. Didn't mean you could have gone over because the credit card company, I'm sure, doing that, you would have excellent credit, and they would just
Oh, they
more and
every
more and
six
more.
months, every 6 months, they're like, congratulations, we've raised your limit. I'd be like, okay, you raised it, but I
Use
didn't.
it. Yeah, that's where we got in trouble with certain things like that. So I think that's super important to understand what you could spend and with some of the with with that just be like I could look at the statement, it says 900, I still have a little bit of room, or uh-oh, it's the 12th and it says 900, like I need to slow down. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. And an episode that I had, there's Christine who developed Brightfin, which is an app that just kind of you swipe your spending into a different spot. It is becoming easier to say drill down and make these decisions because, like you said before, it's kind of complicated when you're doing it on pen and paper, or kind of was when you're, actually making a purchase to figure out where it goes. So, but I do think we do a lot of the same things over and over again every month. We shop at the same
Hmm.
stores, we tend to buy the same things, go the same places. So it's not too hard to stay ahead
Right.
of yourself if you have that awareness there and you kind of put yourself in the driver's seat instead of saying like, oh, the credit limit went up. I guess I could just, make a $10,000 purchase this month. Not if you can afford it.
No,
But
don't.
I think it's great. I think it's an interesting thing. So tell me a little bit more about the book. So what do you want people to take away from the book when they read it? Or if they're thinking, you know what? maybe they're like you or I, and they just like reading books about money, and it helps.
Mm.
Like, what are some of the biggest takeaways that somebody can expect, if they are looking to get, to afford, maybe they have some big goals. So what are some of the things they can take away?
So earlier I talked about how one of the things that frustrated me about reading all those other books is very few of them. I think I counted like 7.5 and half because one of the books like almost got you there. Didn't have a where do I start and where do I go next or what's the decision tree
Yeah.
if I'm just starting out or starting over. And so I have my favorite part of the book is called the Paycheck Playbook. And the Paycheck Playbook takes you through here's what you do first, here's what you do next, and then here's how you decide which your number 3 step is. And I love this part of the book so much that I actually give it away for free on my website,
Hmm.
paycheckplaybook.com, because I want everybody to feel like, okay, if I had to do this first, how would I make that happen? And if I did this next, how would I make that happen? So that they have a path to follow as they're working to get their money to a really good place.
I love that. I think so many people have, have these goals and they're thinking about it, and you're right. They just they don't know where to start. And I think that can be sometimes really getting out of overwhelm or stress or indecision. It requires action. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that can be very confusing because you're afraid you're going to make a mistake. So I love the fact that you kind of, and even, you just took it to this, this first, next, and this is how we decide on what's third. And I think for some people, even just doing that can be helpful. Or, if you feel like, stressed and overwhelmed, like with my book is more on the money mindset side, even if it's just writing it down, and like sometimes you have to do something to get it out
You
of your
that
head.
always,
Out.
actually, always you have to do something. That action, just one action starts the momentum.
Yep. And then your brain starts to say, okay, I am somebody that can figure things out. I am somebody who's making progress. I'm figuring this stuff
Mm-hmm.
out. So that's so helpful. So, and repeat again where people can find that chapter for, because I think that's such a great thing. If you're out there and you're like, okay, I'm ready to do something. I want to be able to afford everything. I want to feel good. How can they find that?
Yeah, they can get the Paycheck Playbook at paycheckplaybook.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd love for people who are looking just to follow you, or maybe to find a whole, they like to read. I think that there's a lot of people who are listening to the show, I know, that have read these books and that are, enjoying this journey of figuring out money. So where can they follow you, and where can they find your book?
Yes, the easiest way to find me is I'm most active on Instagram at my_finance sis, like your sister, finance sis. And I just got word that my book it will now be on target.com.
Oh,
So folks can go to
congratulations.
target.com, or if it does well there, you might even see it in your local location. But it's
Fantastic.
available on all the major online booksellers. You can go to darlabishop.com if you'd like to have a signed copy. I don't charge any extra for that, and I put a little extra good energy in it when I mail
Uh,
them out directly. Or soon enough, you can go to target.com.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Congratulations. And thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your book and talking about your financial life, because I think it's so helpful for people just to hear the way other people have, how you paid for, how you grew up, all of those things. A lot of us feel like it's just us who are going through this, or just us who experienced this, and everybody else had it easier or better. I guarantee you can learn something from listening and hearing about how other people have, made their decisions and mistakes and gotten to where they're at. So thank you again so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for everybody listening, if you're looking to pick up a copy of Demystifying Money, or you just want to catch up on other episodes of the podcast, please head over to mistylynch.com. I would love to hear your thoughts on this book and other books. And thank you again so much for listening. And we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.